Hi, good afternoon. I'm going to be looking at many of the things that we've already talked about today, but from a slightly different perspective, and that is the perspective of an active investor in a large private equity fund. We are the ones that are often tasked with funding this wonderful science and these wonderful programs. And many of the people that we've seen here, like Lori Clark and the folks from Greenleaf, are people we turn to ensure that when we make these investments, we're headed in the right direction. And I thought I would try to show you from our perspective how the focused ultrasound world looks right now. So the first question is, how do large funds, those that fund investments like this, think? And by those I mean funds that are more than $1 billion, those that are multinational, and those that within those constraints still can do early stage companies. That's not a very large group, but it is a group. And you have to understand that we are gauged by essentially one number. That number for us is called IRR, and most people are not familiar with that. But that IRR is the internal rate of return, and really what it is dollars divided by time. What that means is that for us, it's not a matter of if, for example, focused ultrasound is going to become successful. It's really a matter of when, because every single win we have is ultimately divided by time. And even in our head, you can see that if we are off by a year, that cuts our IRR by 50%. And so the world is riddled with companies that were funded too early or investors that came in too late. Our goal is to try to get in at the right time. And so amongst Jews, there's the question called the Passover question. Why is tonight different than all other nights? Why now? And from our perspective, that time is when various important factors begin to coalesce. When the basic science begins to be believable, when the clinical results begin to be of value, when there's some comfort within the regulatory space that this is a platform technology that is real, that there is initial and consistent reimbursement that we as investors can at least model. Even if it's not ultimately correct, we have to be able to model something. Then there need to be initial investments that are made in the space so that we can all coalesce and follow. And ideally what we want to see is returns in the space. And I think where the Focused Ultrasound Foundation has done much more than almost any foundation has done in any other area is that they have sort of been knocking at our doors for a pretty long time, asking us to look at the fact that they've addressed many of these factors and want us to start looking at investing. And so I want to thank in advance Focused Ultrasound Foundation for these charts that I'm utilizing. I'm going to go through them quickly, but what I'm trying to show here is that from a basic science perspective, the growth over the last period of time has been very significant. And what you see here is these charts ending in about 14 and 15, because that's how long it's going to take now for us to invest and then harvest companies in the space. I'm referring oftentimes here to Outtakes simply because it's an easy path for us all to follow. But again, once the clinical data began to be real and we began to believe that the technology had value, and once there was regulatory comfort in a multiplicity of areas and also a multiplicity of risks and non-significant risks, we began to look at things more closely. And then we began to look for companies that successfully attain reimbursement and maintain reimbursement. And as we've heard this afternoon, that in and of itself is an art. But when that happens, we as investors can begin to believe that there's an actual business there. And that's when you start seeing investments of the size that are important to us, because when we manage the kind of money that we manage, it's usually very difficult for us to make small investments unless at the end of the day we see them being the road into a much larger investment. And it's really hard for us to often be the first because money has to come in groups for us to all succeed. When we see large investments in the space, that's another indication that we're probably looking at the right time. And so the question now is, are all of these steps that yielded the ultimate investments going to then yield harvested rewards? We, as a fund, Orbit Advisors, and some of my colleagues in other similar funds are believers that the platform is ready for a variety of reasons that we've talked about today. But I believe that once the question is answered and the belief is clear, then the floodgates of funding will open. And I believe that that period of time is within the next 2 to 3 years. And what I would encourage you to do is to start coming and speaking to funds like us early on, even before you're looking for investment, to try to explain to us what it is that we need to see in order for us to be able to go through our process and let you know what it is we can or can't do with you. So for example, I've mentioned Greenleaf before. One of the things that's very helpful to us is to know that you've got a regulatory path that you've thought through and that's validated by experts so that we can put a timeline and a number around that path. It's very helpful to us if you come to us with a reimbursement plan that's been validated by an authority that we can look up to and call and speak to, because all of those things save us time. And in fact, because of the way we're measured, as I mentioned before, we've got to process deals quickly. The easier you make it for us to see these fundamental stepping stones, the easier it is for us to fund you. We are extremely excited about the space. We have one investment that we are, as a fund, extremely excited about. The slides that I showed you earlier today are actually the slides that I used in validating that very first investment, and I presented to Carl Gordon and Jonathan Silverstein, between them probably the two largest funders in the world of biotechnology, and both of whom were convinced enough to say, go for it. So that's my real term for you guys, is I think it's time to go for it. I hope you utilize all the resources that the folks at the Foundation, Greenleaf, and your consultants here are here to offer you, so that when you come to us, you're prepared, and we can help you get on your way and get it done. Thank you all very much for your time. Oh, the most important thing I want to show you in all this change is that picture, which was taken in 2015 when I joined Urban. I guess some things don't change.